Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and today I'm going to be reviewing Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So, this is the first book in a duology. It is one of the first books that V.E. Schwab wrote, or one of her earlier published books. I don't know whether she's actually had other stuff published before this, but I watched a really good interview with her about this where she's talking about how she hadn't settled on her pen name when they were publishing this, and the publisher was like, oh, we think we want to go with V.E. Schwab instead of Victoria Schwab, which is what she was going with. The funny part about that is that the V and the E stands for Victoria Elizabeth, and the characters in this book are called Victor and Eli. So she's named these two characters after herself. And she says in the interview that I watched that she said she wrote the book for herself, and she didn't think it would ever get published, that anyone else would read it. And I'm happy to say that I'm very glad that it did get published, because I thoroughly enjoyed this book. For those of you who are curious, this is billed as a fantasy novel. Loads of people shelve this as fantasy. I think it might even be categorized as fantasy. I actually am not sure. So I think it's categorized as fantasy, but I think that's purely based on Schwab's other work. So this, to me, is a sci-fi book. It deals with science. The two main characters are scientists. The subgenre, I guess, of this is that it's a superhero book, kind of. And in fact, I would say it's maybe more accurate to say that this is a super villain book. So both of the major characters in this book are villains, I would say. One of them is more kind of outwardly villainous, and the other is more like inwardly villainous. And I think that this is called the villains duology. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. Let's talk about the rough plot, and then I will tell you guys my rating and kind of final thoughts. This is going to be a non-spoiler. However, there are a few aspects of the book that you can't really get into without spoiling it. So I just want to make very clear that there are a couple of things I'm going to have to talk about that are kind of spoilery, but that I think you should still be able to enjoy the book with the stuff that I'm going to discuss. So let's dive straight in. So I think that this book really lives and dies by two things. One is its characters. Its two major characters are really, really well done, really well written. I really just like what V. Schwab did with Victor. I think Victor is genuinely really fascinating, and I liked a lot of the kind of relationship between the two, the like competitiveness from Victor. And I liked all the characters, to be honest. I really liked Serena as well. And Mitch was great. Essentially all the characters are great. The other thing that sets this book apart is the peculiar plot structure. So if you are unaware, this book is written in a very non-linear fashion. So what happens throughout the book is that basically it's a book of two parts. The first half is mostly from Victor's point of view, and the second half is mostly from Eli's point of view. There are some other POVs scattered through, but that's the majority of it. So the other side of that is that it's not, as I said before, it's non-linear. So you follow not just the events of the present day, but you also follow the events of 10 years ago, whatever, when they first met, the two characters. So you start with the present day, and like there's kind of what's going on here sort of thing, because it basically starts with Victor getting a teenager to dig up a corpse for him. in a graveyard, and it is really fun. It's a great opening scene, really properly hooks you, and then it shifts back and goes like 10 years earlier, this was happening. And what happens is Victor and Eli are roommates at college, and they're both number one and number two in all classes. They're the smartest people they know. Victor is the son of two self-help gurus. So they have been, feeding him psychobabble and all this his whole life, and they've been basically absent the whole time because they've been on tour promoting books and all this sort of stuff. Whereas Eli's parents are both they're both ministers. They're both they're in the faith, they're a Christian faith, and Eli has a very, very strong Christian faith, despite his extremely scientific leaning. The really interesting thing here is that there's kind of like a turning point in the book where you find out that Victor is best friends with Eli, but is also incredibly suspicious of him because he can see that there's something beneath the surface, that Eli isn't all, like movie star looks, winning personality, nicest, most friendly person alive. He has something under the surface. And that obviously reveals itself throughout the book. But seen from Victor's point of view is really fascinating. And Victor has this obsession with one thing, which is buying his parents' books or stealing them and redacting the words, which I thought was really funny. And the cover kind of aping that I really liked as well. So basically, Eli has this obsession that he hasn't really shared with anyone, but he kind of eventually slips out, which is he is obsessed with something called EOs, extraordinaries. So people who are completely rumours at this point. They're like, nobody truly really thinks that they're real. They're like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever, but slightly more prevalent. And essentially, these are people with powers. And Eli is obsessed with them, and he wants to write a term paper on them. And Victor is kind of pulled in to support him on it. And while Eli is kind of going down the I want to know more about EOs route, Victor is eventually like, well, why don't we make an EO? And basically events unfold from there. And I think with some really smart foreshadowing as well, like there'll be bits where the narration is like, and then the thing happened that would change everyone's lives if it was different. And I do really like good foreshadowing done like that. You get some of that in books like Stormlight Archive, where they'll reference something that happens in the past, and you see the event, and you're like, "Oh God, this is pretty awful, actually." And then, so you've got this kind of very non-linear story structure, which takes us up to today, in the modern day, where Victor has escaped from prison. He's in prison for some real bad stuff. And Eli is basically touring the country and taking out EOs that cause problems. So one of the major ones that's discussed at the beginning of the book is like a bank robber. There's a bank robber who is robbing banks with his EO special abilities, and Eli takes him out, basically. Really interesting. Like the way that Eli works and the way that his mind works when you get into his section of the book was really good. And I think that it's very interesting that both of the characters are villains, but V. Schwab very clearly wants you to root for one of them. And I've got a lot of time for the villain who's basically a hero. So like Victor is very much an anti-hero. He's done, he's not the nicest dude. He's done a lot of bad stuff, and there are lots of things that he's done that he doesn't seem to feel guilty for. But then in comparison with Eli, he becomes almost a completely different character. Really interesting to have those kind of contrasts of character, but also the contrasts of POV. The writing styles are quite different for both. The book is quite humorous. I laughed a lot at it. Overall, I just really enjoyed this one. I almost don't want to... Normally, I try and keep my reviews to be around 15 to 20 minutes. But I'll be honest with you guys. I almost want to say to you, don't bother watching the rest of this review. Like, just go out and pick this book up. I know that there are some people who have issues with this book. There is fridging in this book. There are, the two main characters are two straight white men. Although the community around this book is like, oh, but they're gay. And they were roommates. And there is something to that. There is definitely something from Victor's side in his POV chapters, especially the way that he looks back at how he felt about Eli. Those chapters are quite illuminating, and it feels like there is kind of a fascination, infatuation coming on from Eli. But I do also think that we need to recognise that male friendships exist. There's a big thing in a lot of media that is kind of a little sexless. So things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example, people ship Steve and Bucky together, right? And I think that we need to just take a step back and be like, actually, really close male friendships do exist. And that is what I think is kind of going on here. I haven't read the sequel book. Maybe in the sequel book, everyone's gay. And this is not coming from the perspective of someone who is like a very sheltered straight white man. So I think that we need to, as I said, as media consumers, we need to take a step back and be like, no, actually, really close male friendships do exist. There are men who will die for their friends, and it's not because they romantically love them, it's because they love them as friends. Like that especially people who are in stressful situations together, like say you're in an experiment gone awry, or you're soldiers in World War II, Steve and Bucky. Like, the bonds that are formed in those sorts of situations are very strong. And I think honestly, that's what's happening here. There's no hint to me of romantic stuff. There's maybe like I said, there is a sense of infatuation, but you can have that infatuation from a begins with a P. I actually can't remember the name of the word. Platonic. Infatuation from a platonic perspective, which is honestly what I think is happening here. I'd like to read the sequel, and I'm kind of toing and froing as to whether I will have enough time to read it before Wind and Truth, because this was a really short book for me. I read this in like 36 hours because I had so much fun time reading it. It's also quite quick. Like, I read all the Eli chapters in a single day, and the Victor chapters over like an evening and a day. And I thought the audiobook narration was great as well. So, because I swapped between physical and audiobook. So yeah, I'm currently reading a Wheel of Time book. I'm about 45% in. And so obviously I'll finish that before Wind and Truth. But do I want to read Vicious after that before Wind and Truth? I'll have to really have a think about it when it comes to scheduling. If you have read this one and you think that I should make it a priority to read the sequel, then let me know down in the comments below. One other thing as well, my friends Laura and Mare both have issues with this book. One of the big things that Laura hated was, this is Laura from Hardy's Books, she hated how everything felt a little bit contrived, like, oh, this person meets this person who they needed to meet to do this thing. Like, things kind of line up. The dominoes kind of fall exactly the way they needed to for the story to happen. And as I was reading it, I was like, well, this kind of feels like it's going to be explained, that there's like some sort of power that's drawing it all together. But I quite liked the idea of the like, well, you know, they needed to meet for the story, you know, the coincidence or whatever. I really liked it. I didn't find that at all. I didn't like, it just didn't come across to me like, oh, well, that's a bit contrived. You know, it just, you know, made sense for the story to happen, if that makes sense. And it's, maybe I'm reading too much Wheel of Time and I've got too much Taviran stuff in my head, but I really enjoyed this one. And the contrivedness did not really bother me. I would have liked to have seen some more female characters. I'd like to have seen some more kind of diverse characters in this book. But at the end of the day, it is only 300 pages and there's like there's five main characters, and two of them are women. So it's not, I do wish that the cast was a bit more diverse. But again, maybe we'll get that from the sequel. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Have you read this book? What did you think about it? Did you love the sequel as well? I haven't read the sequel, so please don't spoil me on it. However, please drop down and write your comments below and let me know what you thought. Let me know whether you think I should make the sequel a priority, or like if it's bad or something, if it's like a bad sequel, let me know and I'll put it to the back of the list. I do still want to read it sometime though. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I do reviews every single Monday and I do loads of bookish content throughout the week. So please join the community, subscribe. I talk about sci-fi and fantasy books primarily, but I do have another V. Schwab series to read. So if you like Schwab stuff, I do have the multiverse one. I can't remember what it's called. Threads of Magic, Shades of Magic, maybe Shades of Magic. I have the book on the shelf, so I'm looking forward to reading that one, especially after reading this and really enjoying the writing style. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Drop down in the comments below. Like this video if you liked it, and I will speak to you tomorrow.